Hello and welcome back to another episode of Come Over for Dinner. I'm so excited you're joining me today. I'm Bess Hawthorne and I have a very special guest. Her name is Loraine Wahl. She moved from Montana about 11 years ago to Alberta, Canada, and her daughter has many, many good things to say about her hospitality over the years. One of which is that it's always a treat to be taken care of so well every time she goes back to visit. So we're going to hear a lot about the type of hospitality that Mrs. Wahl has done over the years, and we're going to just talk about just all the different aspects of it. So welcome, Loraine.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
So tell me a little bit about yourself. You moved from Montana to Alberta, Canada 11 years ago. I guess it's still northern, but moving to Canada, that's a big change.
It is, although I'm originally Canadian. I'm first generation Canadian, born and raised on Vancouver Island, Western Canada. I have 6 siblings. Both of my parents were born in the Ukraine, and my mom was a World War II refugee, and she immigrated to Canada in 1948, and she met my dad here in Alberta. And so both of them began their married life here in Alberta. My husband was born and raised in Montana. He has 8 siblings. He and I met at college in California, and we married in 1976. And we raised our 5 children on the family wheat farm in Montana and homeschooled them from start to finish. So that was a total of about 20 years. As part of the introduction, we have 5 children and 21 grandchildren, ages 1 through 19. So our home was in the middle of nowhere. We lived at the dead end of a 7-mile trail to a secondary highway. And the nearest town where we did our shopping and went to church and knew a lot of people was 45 minutes drive on a good day. So when it rained, because it was just a 7-mile trail, it was slippery when it rained. It got drifted in the snow in the winter. When it rained or snowed, it could take up to 2 hours. So we got stuck a lot along the driveway.
Wow.
Yeah, so that farm actually is from here where we live now. It's about an hour and a quarter. So it's not that far, but it's across the border from us.
Your daughter mentioned that you always had a hot meal ready upon their arrival and fridges and freezers stashed full of food, and that you were an expert in planning ahead, stocking up, and organizing, which I guess you would have to be if you were that far away from town.
I sure did. Yes, it was quite a learning curve for me to learn how to stock up. But my sister-in-law, when we first moved to Montana from California, where we lived for a year and a half after we were married, she taught me how to stock up. And I am so grateful. And I still do, even though there are just 2 of us. And it pays off.
How many freezers do you have?
Right now, I have 2 upright freezers and 1 chest freezer.
Well, if you have a big family coming to visit, we can say that you still have an excuse. You have to be prepared for all those guests.
That's true. And I don't have to go shopping as often. For fresh items, yes. But for other things, no. And I have a big pantry of dried goods and so on. So, yeah.
I hear that you had relatives from Germany who came to visit for a few weeks. You hosted them for 3 weeks, served yummy meals with a lot of produce coming from your garden. You served cherry pies, and I'm sure you pulled lots and lots of things from your freezers.
I sure did. Yeah, I did a lot of preparation ahead of time because I wanted to make that time visit as much as possible. And we did a lot of things. We took them here and there and everywhere and down into Montana as well to Glacier Park and visited other relatives in the area and had a picnic with my 2 daughters and their families nearby and just did a lot of things. So I wanted to be able to do that and not be cooking the whole time. So that was really fun.
Your daughter did mention that you were raised in the Mennonite tradition, known for its mouth-watering, starchy, Russian, Ukrainian, German meals.
My mother was part of the group of German Mennonites that came from Germany and Poland, and Catherine the Great invited them to the Ukraine because there's very good farmland there, and she knew that the Germans, the Mennonites, were good farmers. So they settled in the southern part near the Azov Sea and set up colonies, not like a high-rise colony, but groups of homes, and they farmed and did a really good job of farming there.
Do you often cook German food, or do you just mix it with American food or Canadian food? I mean, do you just cook a little bit of everything?
A little bit of everything. I think I did more of that when the children were home growing up. I don't do that so much anymore because we've changed the way we eat. We do less meat, more vegetables and fruit, and try to eat, I guess, more of a Mediterranean type of diet now for health reasons. But when we have people over, yes, I will do more of that, and just especially Easter and Christmas when we have family and other people here.
Your daughter Rachel says she has very fond memories of hearing many people's stories told over your antique dining room table. Everyone from missionaries to custom crop cutters to the banker to the random delivery truck driver who needed a place to stay. That both you and your husband had large extended families. There was always crowded family gatherings, like you mentioned earlier, and it was just a fun place to be. Very open and welcoming.
Right. And my goal as the children were growing up, because we were so remote, was to have people over. And my husband wanted that too. Our guest books are full of signatures from people from all over the world.
That's fun that you keep a guest book to remember who's come to your home for so many years. That was a tradition that went on in my day. You know, of course, people had guest books at weddings that you signed and that sort of thing, but having one in your home is a unique idea.
Mm-hmm. Oh, we've kept one all these years, the 47 years that we've been married. I was just digging out the ones that we had at the farm, the guest books, and looking through them, and just was reminded of the wonderful times that we had with all the people that came into our home. It's just been a blessing. And, we're still in touch with many of them. Many of them were not, but hopefully they were blessed by being in our home. We definitely were encouraged and blessed by them. Our lives have been enriched by all the people that have come through, and our children have benefited too. And now when we travel somewhere, we'll go, oh, we know somebody over there. Maybe we could call them up and see if we can stop by and say hi. Or, it's nice to be able to know people everywhere.
Mm-hmm. I hear that you also hosted the Katrina School of Art taught by Barry Stebbing. You hosted this art school on the farm for several years, and that you hosted everyone overnight for 10 days. No wonder
Mm-hmm.
you had to have 3 freezers. You are very, very hospitable, but also very open to large groups for long extended times. So we have to hear all of your tips for planning for that much time, and also how you do it with grace and not being flustered and worried and overwrought with somebody being in your home for 10 days or multiple people being in your home for 10 days.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'll tell you this. Honestly speaking, I don't like cooking for large groups. I will do it if
The secret is out.
I don't. But if I have time, that's the secret, I guess, to reduce stress is to start planning ahead. Like for the Katrina School of Art, by the way, that was in memory of our daughter, our middle daughter, Katrina. We lost her when she was 19. And it was an art school in memory of her because she was our artist. It was not my idea. It was Barry Stebbing, the artist, who taught the art. He came all the way from South Carolina. And so we invited whoever wanted to come and be serious about learning art. And so that was usually in June, early July when we had that. We had that 4 different summers. And I would start cooking in March.
I could see why.
And they all stayed at our place too.
If you have food ahead of time like that and just stashed away, then you could actually enjoy your company, sit and do the art with the art school, and not just be doing cooking and cleaning constantly if you had some things to pull out.
And then we drove 2.5 hours to pick them up from the airport because that's how far it was. And then they came out, they stayed at our place, and we had a great time. They were all strangers to each other, more or less. Some came as, sisters or a grandma and a granddaughter and so on. And we would have orientation the first night, and they just kind of all sat there. At the end of the 9 or 10 days, they didn't want to go home.
They were all family with each other. That's
They
wonderful.
were. It was great.
So, how many people did you have at one time? How many students did you accept?
It varied each year. The first year we had, I believe it was 10. The second year we had about 20. And then the next year, I can't remember exactly, 12 or 15. And then it was about the same the following year. In total, the number of students that came through over the 4 different sessions was 52 people. And they were from all over Canada and the US.
That's amazing. What an incredible opportunity.
Mm-hmm. When we moved up here, I knew that wasn't possible anymore to do that because we don't have the bedroom space like we did at the farm. So I kind of miss that, but I don't miss all the work.
So, from all your years of hospitality, what are some of the favorite things that you served? Or do you have a particular menu, a favorite food that you would pull out every time you had company over?
It depended on who was coming and from where they were coming. My husband said, in preparation for this, he said, you need to tell her that you like to make new recipes for guests. I like to try them on
You break all the
yeah.
rules.
And
I do too.
right. That's right. I think it's fun because if they like it, well, then I can serve it to other guests too. But I know I'm taking a chance to.
I know sometimes it's a
Yes.
disaster. I have to tell myself, don't make a new recipe. And then sometimes I still do. But then you have an excuse, you can blame it on the new recipe. But it sometimes can be a disaster if you do that.
Exactly. I've kind of, especially during the art school years, I used a lot of taste of home recipes.
That was a
They
big
are tried and
website
true.
in the day. They may have had cookbooks too, and I know the website's still around, but they
Mm-hmm.
had a magazine and they had a website, and
Yeah.
they had a lot of good home cooking type recipes.
Right. And I actually went to Taste of Home Cooking school, like an afternoon thing in a big city down in Montana. I attended that, and there were hundreds of women there. And then I bought their cookbook afterwards. But that was so interesting.
I didn't know they did that.
Yeah, I don't know if they still do, but they traveled around the country and put on these little cooking shows. But yes, I enjoy making a huge kettle of hearty soup, homemade soup. It's a meal in a dish, and then with homemade bread, whole wheat bread, and a simple dessert. And another thing, if we have company staying overnight, and then for breakfast, I will usually I have gallon buckets of homemade granola in my freezer. So I just pull that out, the night before, and then it's available for breakfast the next day. And I've had a lot of people comment on that, and they've wanted the recipe. It's got 20 ingredients in it, and
20 ingredients. That sounds
yeah.
amazing. We definitely need this recipe because with granola for breakfast, you can do milk or you could do yogurt and berries or you could just eat it plain. It's so versatile.
Mm-hmm. And I usually do buffet for meals anymore. I don't set dishes on the table. It's just more efficient. It's just easier. I guess that would be a shortcut. It's not as formal, but it works well for me. And I have a nice long counter. I did at the farm as well. And so I'll just set out the granola and then, extra fruit, yogurt, nuts, milk, different kinds of milk because not everybody can have cow's milk. And yeah, and it's like a smorgasbord.
That's a great idea.
That's one thing I like to do. And then The other thing was what the menu I was going to talk about today.
Tell me a little bit about the menu that you would serve.
I decided to talk about the one we had for Easter.
That sounds special.
I talked to my daughter about that, and she said, "Oh, you need to talk about that." And so I'll just tell you what I serve. It's German food, of course, and my mother used to do this too. She would serve this meal at Easter and maybe other times too, but I only do it once a year at Easter time. So we have Wareneki. They're like pierogies with a cream gravy, farmer sausage, which I don't know if that's available in the US. I always used to come up across the border and buy it up here in Canada. But you can use kielbasa or a different kind of sausage, like a smoked ham maybe in place of it. So farmer sausage, salad, and I vary that each year, a cooked vegetable, some homemade rolls, and then for dessert, I have Obstsuppe. It's a German word meaning fruit soup, and I'll describe that in a bit. And some years I'll make Pasca. I did this year, Pasca for dessert. Sometimes I'll make hot cross buns. You've probably heard of those, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay, so the Varenika they're a staple dish in the southern Ukraine, especially amongst the German Mennonites who lived there in the 1900s, including my mom's family. They're half moon shaped, so you put a dry cured cottage cheese filling mixed with other things in it, and then you cook it in boiling water.
Well, there's cottage cheese here in the stores, but it's not dry curd. It would be just your typical, I don't know, cottage cheese. I don't know. I didn't even know that there was a different cottage cheese. I don't think I've ever heard of dry curd. So I can't imagine putting this cottage cheese inside of a dough. So we probably would have to do a substitute in America. I don't know, unless there's a specialty shop we could go to, which is possible. Some places may have that.
I only make Varenika with the dry cured cottage cheese. Some optional fillings that other people make are sweet or savory, like fruit or potato and cheese,
Yes.
or just potato, meat, or even sauerkraut. I've never made any of those. I just stick with what I grew up with. And if you can't find it, what you can do is buy regular cottage cheese or even ricotta. You've heard of ricotta cheese, right? Or regular cottage cheese, and then strain it. Like put it in a cheesecloth, let it drip, or in a strainer, and let it strain out the liquids.
And then use it.
Okay,
well, that would work. Do you leave it overnight or just a quick strain?
Well, I've never strained it. I've always used dry cured cottage cheese, but
so I could Google it. I think it's when you make panna cotta, you have to do that. And I think you leave it for hours. I don't remember how many, but you do strain it and let all of the whey come out of it.
Right. Probably overnight. And it doesn't matter if it dries out. It's supposed to be dry anyway, right? So probably overnight would be a good idea. The Varenika tastes better or the best with a rich cream gravy over top. So I buy this heavy cream and I make the gravy and I flavor the gravy with sausage drippings.
Sounds amazing.
From the farmer sausage.
What is farmer sausage? I mean, how is it different than what we could find in America?
Probably the taste. It's not that much different than I would compare it more to kielbasa, Polish sausage. Very similar to that. It's a little bit thicker. It's a beef pork combination. They just call it farmer sausage. We can get it up here at Costco.
Really?
Because there's so many Mennonites and Germans around here. Yeah. And so they have it available there. The taste really is not much different than any of the other, like the Polish sausage. And I cut it. It comes in these coils, the rounds, and you just cut them up into pieces, and I put them in the roaster and with some water and just bake it for an hour, hour and a half. And then I use the drippings from that to make the gravy. You have to set aside a lot of time to make these Varenika.
I can imagine. And it sounds like a very special dinner. So this is, if you serve it for Easter, then you would be prepping days ahead of time. So, yep, that's okay. Keep going.
Yeah, so what I do with the Varenika, maybe a month or 6 weeks ahead, I will set aside part of a day, like a whole morning, and I will make the Varenika and then lay them on a parchment paper on a cookie sheet individually, stick them in the freezer so they freeze. And then once they're frozen, then I'll put them in bags, Ziploc bags. And then on the day of the meal, like this year, I pulled out the bags of 88 Varenika that I had made and just cooked them up. And so on the day of the meal, it's not a lot of work. All you do is you put them in the boiling water frozen, and just takes a few minutes and they're ready. So saves a lot of time if you can do it ahead and just freeze them. So if there are any, and I say if there are any leftover Varenika, there were about half a dozen left this year. The next day you can fry them in butter until they're crisp. Oh, they are delicious. I think they taste better that way.
Sounds amazing.
Yeah, I think they're more tasty that way, to me anyway, than the other way. That recipe for Varenika is in the Mennonite Girls Can Cook cookbook, recipe book. And that's available on Amazon in Canada and in the US.
Do you use that book quite a bit for recipes?
No, I don't. Just when I'm making something German. I have several in there. Like, for example, borscht. You may have heard of that kind of soup. That's a Mennonite recipe.
Yes.
Cabbage rolls, that comes from the Ukraine, Russia. Those kinds of things. Or Zwieback. Zwieback are the double-decker buns. The bottom part is bigger than the top part, and then after they're baked, you can pull them apart and put butter and jam on both pieces. They're cute.
There's all kinds of food that I need to try in my lifetime. I have not tried any of that.
Oh, you'll have to get that
Sounds
recipe book.
amazing. I will. I will have to get that and try some Mennonite recipes.
Right. The Obstsuppe is a cold fruit soup, like I said, made with a mixture of dried fruit, apples, raisins, prunes, and apricots. And you cook the fruit in water until it's soft, and then you thicken it with cornstarch and cinnamon. While it's cooking, I put slices of lemon in there to add a little, lemon flavor, but I remove them afterwards after the soup is done. And so the cornstarch is flavored with cinnamon and star anise. I put that in a spice ball, and while the fruit is cooking, that anise flavor goes throughout the dish. So that's really what makes it very, very tasty.
That's a great idea for a dessert. Can you also freeze that where you can just defrost it, or does it have to be made?
No,
It has to be fresh.
I can make it 3 or 4 days ahead of time and then just keep it in the refrigerator, and it keeps very well. I make that every year. And so on the day of the meal, I just I have a really pretty soup tureen. So I'll put that Obstsuppe in there so it's more presentable. It's a beautiful dish that I have it in, and they all serve themselves. I put that on the buffet counter, dessert dishes, and everybody helps themselves. So we're very informal that way. And then Pascha is the other item that I mentioned. That is a sweet Easter bread baked in various size tin cans. I say tin cans like the big coffee can, or little 15-ounce cans, or in between 32-ounce cans. And so I grease them really well on the inside, and then I put the dough in there to let it rise.
Uh-huh. I've never thought of that before. That's so interesting.
Yeah, they look like cute little mushrooms. That's how that bread is often made in these cans. I don't know where that started, but it's very, very different. So then when it's cooled off, no, when I take it out of the oven, yes, there's a trick to this because you cannot stand the bread up to cool off. So I roll up towels and put the towels next to each other. And then in the indentation between two towels, I lay the pasca in there to cool off sideways.
Does it just come out of the can really easily? Can it just kind of fall out and that's how you cool it? Or do you cool it in
No,
the
I
can?
don't cool it in the can because then it would get soggy. So I'll run a butter knife just around the edge a little bit just to loosen it. And then it comes right out. Depending on how well I grease it. I have to grease it well.
Right. Sure.
So when it's cooled off, I can freeze that. So I'll put it in bags. I made that way ahead of time, froze it. And then the day before I took it out. And on the day of the meal, then I set it in a dish to secure it so it can stand upright. And then I'll make a very thin, runny icing and spread the icing on top so that it runs down the sides, and then put sprinkles on top. And I usually use pastel colors for spring, the mixed sprinkle colors. And this year, my youngest daughter's birthday was on that day, so I used the big pasca as her birthday cake, so to speak, and put some candles on top, and then we sang happy birthday to her, and so it served two purposes.
Right. Instant birthday cake.
Right. Yeah, so that's that meal.
I'm going to have to look at these recipes and plan way ahead of time. Do each dish individually where I can really focus and concentrate on how to make this one. I'll pick the ones that I can freeze first. Speaking of shortcuts or time savers, you mentioned some of them, just prepping ahead, freezing some of the things ahead. Do you have any other ideas for this menu of ways that you can, save time as you're preparing such a fabulous meal?
Yeah, I think I mentioned that I cook the sausage first thing in the morning because our meal is a supper meal. So I cook the sausage in the morning so that I have the drippings and then I can make the gravy with that. And then I'll put the gravy into my little crock pot and I just put it on the counter, turn it on and forget about it. And it's ready for the supper meal.
Using a crock pot is a great idea.
Right. And so I use the same idea for the sausage. I bake it in the oven in the morning, first thing, and then I'll put it in the crock pot, turn it on low, and then it's ready. So I don't have to mess with that. So my counter has actually got the food in crock pots and, the pasca is on the table. I use that as my table decoration.
Sounds like a good one. Yeah, all the different sizes of bread, and that's kind of fun when you can double up on table decor, but yet you can eat it.
That's true. Right.
Let's take a quick break. Are you searching for hands-on activities to help your kids explore the practical side of science? Look no further than your kitchen. Inquisicook blends food science and culinary arts into an engaging program that puts delicious food on the family table. Let Inquisicook do the teaching with lesson videos, reliable recipes, and assessment tools that put students on track for success. Their online platform is easy to navigate and optimized for mobile, so the learning experience can move from the classroom to the kitchen without a hitch. Inquisicook turns curious students into intuitive cooks, not just recipe followers. Say goodbye to the tyranny of the ingredients list and say hello to utilizing what's in season, what's on sale, or what's in the fridge. Visit Inquisicook.com to view sample lessons, then check out the recipe gallery to see just how crave-worthy science can be. What is your best prep tip for having people into your home? How do you prepare? I mean, we've talked about the food aspect of it where you're just thinking ahead, planning ahead food-wise, but is there anything in particular that you would recommend as far as just getting your home ready? And you host overnight guests a lot, so wow, that just really involves a lot of home prep. You're not just doing the areas that they see when they walk in. You're doing bedrooms and all sorts of things, laundry room.
Right. And there again, I pace myself because it's just two of us now. I don't have the help of my children, of course. I don't do well with spur of the moment company. I just don't. I like to know ahead of time. So I pace myself and do, you know, preparation. If they're overnight company, I start cleaning the house a few days ahead of time, and then I plan my meal and just pace myself. I guess that's the key. I don't wait till last minute. I can't just go shopping all of a sudden. We're not near my favorite grocery store here. We're an hour away. So that part I have to plan ahead as well. And it's just mainly just planning ahead and doing things, freezing things that I can freeze, and then doing last minute things on the day of. I always keep a running list of groceries. I have a piece of paper. So we go to Montana once a month, usually, for different things. So I have that list because I know what I like to get down there. I have another list for up here for where we go shopping up here. So I add items as I run out of things. I'll add those items as needed. So planning ahead and stocking up is, like I said, what I do to reduce stress. For example, if the ketchup bottle in the kitchen is half full, I know I have another one in my pantry. I just know that because I always have at least one extra, if not more, of a certain item that I use often. So buying multiple items at sale price saves money in the long run and shopping time too. The day before I go shopping, I type up my list so I can read it easily, grouping the fresh fruits and vegetables together, the dairy items together, baking ingredient items together, and so on. My daughter reminded me of that.
She remembers those lists.
She does. And then I attach my list, my 8.5 by 11 sheet of, whatever shopping I have to do besides groceries is on there as well. And I attach it to a clipboard, and then I can't lose it.
You're not going to drop it on the floor and somebody come along and wonder, whose list is this?
No.
Yours is attached to a clipboard. I like it.
Somebody stopped me in a store one day and said, "Whoa, I like that idea. I think I'm going to start doing that myself, and then I won't lose my list." So I'm not sure where I learned that. So as I'm shopping, I cross off the items I find. I circle the ones I don't find. And then I might find them in another store as I go around the city. So that's one prep tip. Another one, I don't know if you want to call it prep, but a helpful kitchen tip for me that I discovered to slow down mold growth on cheese, like a cut block of cheese. I wrap it in paper towel before placing it in a container with a tight lid. I just wrap all my cheese. I have different kinds of cheeses, so they're all wrapped in paper towel. And I line the container with paper towel as well. Or after I wash a 3 or 6 pack of romaine lettuce and spin it in the salad spinner, I store it in gallon Ziploc bags lined with paper towel. So it's not sitting in there. The water can be soaked into the paper towel. It seems to last longer for me. And I also do the same with, I wrap zucchini and bunches of green onion with paper towel and put them in Tupperware. So I do that with a variety of vegetables. Works for me.
That's a great idea. I've done that for lettuce, but I have not ever done it with cheese. So I'll have to remember that's an option for all different sorts of vegetables and cheeses. Who knew? It makes perfect sense because you don't want the moisture, which is going to cause the mold and all of that. So, yeah, I don't know why I haven't thought of that with cheese already because I love cheese. Maybe it's because I eat it so fast. But now that I don't have 5 children at home, the rate at which it disappears has slowed down. So I need these tips.
That's why I do that. If we had children at home, I wouldn't have to do that. It would disappear much faster.
Exactly. What is your best advice for making people feel welcome when they walk into your home? Already, I would feel welcome just by knowing the amounts of food that you have stashed away for your guests when they walk in. You are ready to feed them for days.
Well, speaking of the amount of food, I always told our girls it's better to have more than enough than not enough. So that was my philosophy. So with just the two of us now, I try to have the table set ahead of time and the meal mostly prepared when the guests arrive. And when they arrive, we usually visit a little bit in the entryway. When we lived on the farm and the children were young, I delegated a specific responsibility to each child in preparation for our guests' arrival. For example, one would vacuum, one would clean the bathroom, one would set the table, one would help me with meal prep in the kitchen, and one would greet the guests at the door and hang up their coats and start a conversation, which was really good training for them.
Absolutely.
And then, depending on who came for dinner, I encouraged our children to think of questions ahead of time to ask our guests during the meal because we wanted our children involved in the conversation. We didn't want just the adults talking. If they had children there as well, we wanted them to learn how to ask questions and get them feeling comfortable being at the table with us if they were just first time
Mm-hmm.
guests. Another thing, which is probably quite unusual, but on our dining room wall in this house and also at the farm, we have a framed, we moved it from the farm up to here, is a framed cork board, which is 4 feet long and 3 feet high. And we call it our picture board. So when someone sends us an individual or family picture or a wedding picture, we get a lot of pictures at Christmas time with, Christmas cards. I pin it to the cork board, take the old ones down, put new ones up, and so on. It's absolutely full. There's no extra space on there. Often our guests will notice the pictures when they're sitting around the table, and then they'll begin to ask questions about certain people. So that's a conversation starter in our home. And sometimes they see a picture and they go, oh, I know so-and-so. Oh, you're related to them? That kind of thing.
Uh-huh.
So over the past 40 plus years, that's been a very effective conversation starter.
Yeah, instant art and an instant instead of a photo frames, it's just a collage that it's easy to change in and out.
Mm-hmm. Right.
That's a fun idea. What is your must-have kitchen item besides all of your freezers?
Oh, I didn't even think of that. Well, I'll mention two items that I have several, of course, but I'll mention two items that I used for this Wareneki recipe that I mentioned before. The first one is a Bosch mixer with a slicer shredder attachment and a citrus juicer attachment. I use both of those a lot. When I make bread, of course. When I made the Wareneki dough, I used the Bosch mixer. I've had my machine since 1980. It's
Wow.
worked very, very well for me.
They
Mm-hmm.
made good products back
Yeah.
then. That's incredible because you cook a lot. It's German made.
Oh, it's German.
Well, I was going to say send me the link on Amazon, but we can't find your 1980 version on Amazon, but I'm sure there's an updated one we can look for.
Oh, they're still in business. They've changed the looks of it and, the style, but it still does the same thing. The slicer shredder attachment, I use quite a bit actually. Every fall, I make a batch of sauerkraut, my own homemade sauerkraut. I have a big crock that I put the cabbage into. So I use my Bosch slicer shredder to shred 45 pounds of cabbage. And it's organic cabbage that I buy by the case it's a natural grocers store. And they give me a discount because I'm buying a lot of it. So I use it for that. It would take forever to shred that by hand. So I'm very grateful.
Do you make the sauerkraut just for your family to eat over the course of the year, or do you give this away as gifts?
I give it to one elderly lady that we stay with overnight when we go to Montana. I give it to her as a thank you for letting us stay at her house. Yes, she loves it. Otherwise, no, I'm pretty stingy with it.
You're eating it throughout the year.
We do almost every day. We have a little bit for lunch because it's very healthy for you. And I keep it in glass gallon jars in my refrigerator. So I have 2 refrigerators. I need them because I need space for my sauerkraut.
How long does it last in the refrigerator? What is the shelf life of that? I mean, does it last all year?
It does. Probably 2 years.
Wow.
Because it's fermented.
It's fermented and then you're storing it in the refrigerator and it'll just last indefinitely. Well, a year or two.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've never kept it longer than that, than a couple of years, but I make sure that the lid is very tight too. And another trick is to make sure that the sauerkraut juice, before I put the lid on, I push the sauerkraut down underneath the juice so that there's a layer of sauerkraut juice on top, and that kind of seals it. And then I put the lid on tight so it lasts for a long time.
Sounds delicious. Wow, what a treat.
Oh, it is. We really enjoy it. And another tool, which I only use once a year when I make Wareneki, is for cutting the Wareneki. I know some people, if you look up recipes for Wareneki, some people will demonstrate using a round cookie cutter and individually cutting circles and then putting the filling on each circle for the Wareneki, but I don't do it that way. The recipe I use, you roll out your dough and then you cut a 4-inch wide, and it doesn't matter what length it is, but 4 inches wide piece of dough after you roll it out. And then you put little near the edge of that piece of dough, you place a little mound of the dry cured cottage cheese mixture about 2 inches apart from each other. Then you fold the other side of the dough over top of that so that the edges meet. And then I use this little tool.
It looks like a little muffin cup.
Right. But I can't find it online. I searched and searched for it. I cannot find it. It's about 2.5 to 3 inches diameter. It's not just like a cookie cutter. It has a little lip.
It has a rim.
And it's very sharp. So then when I push down the edge of the, hard to describe, but I push it down.
The edge of the dough?
Yeah, so that this part is actually going to be on the outside of the edge of the dough. So you push on this and it pinches it. It pinches it a little bit.
Okay. Yeah, it's sealing it and cutting it at the same time.
Exactly. Right.
Where did you find yours?
I don't remember.
Yeah. Maybe you just inherited it or found it, at a, I don't know, what are those, like a antique store, or, or maybe you just, it was passed down to you somewhere along the line from a relative or your mom.
No, I don't think my mom had it. I got it. I bought it somewhere, but it's been so long, probably 45 years old. I cannot find it. I'm going to keep looking though. So, but a glass will work, like a glass jar or a round cookie cutter, a biscuit cutter. Those things will work too.
Right.
But I also, just to make sure that there are no gaps in that edge, the sealed edge, I still pinch each one. So I take the Wareneki in hand and then I pinch around the edge and then I put it on the parchment paper on the cookie sheet. So that's a very valuable tool for me.
I could see how that tool would do it all in a very efficient way. So everybody else using their biscuit cutter, it's not sealed, it's cut, but it's not sealed. So you'd have to really make sure that it was pressed well or something. I mean, you would have to do something different.
Mm-hmm. Right. I just wanted to insert something here, a little bit off the topic of what we're talking about right now, but regarding our Easter meal and the guest books that I mentioned, one of my grandchildren handed me an envelope at the end of that day after our Easter meal. And I wrote down he dictated his thoughts to his mom because he's 7 years old. And she wrote down what he said. And I just wanted to read that to you because it's very precious. It's ties in with hospitality. It was an Easter card that he made and wrote Easter, Happy Easter on the outside of it. And then the writing, his little note was inside. And he says, "Dear Grandma, you are very, very hospitable to others. I love the food that you make for me and others. I like your generosity. Thank you for having us for Easter. I'm grateful that Jesus died on the cross for us. Love you so much."
That is precious.
It just touched my heart, and it's so genuine. It comes from his heart.
What a sweet grandson. And you know, that age is when they're first starting to learn how to write letters. And so
Mm-hmm.
it's probably very exciting for him to format one just to you. I'm teaching my second graders right now how to write friendly letters in class.
Oh, good for you.
And the first ones that they did were to the specialty subject teachers, the art teacher, the music teacher, and their PE teacher. But the last one we wrote, they were able to choose. And some of them did pick their grandmother or their mom or their dad. And it was so fun to edit those letters, you know, the rough drafts and read through. They're just precious at that age and just so genuine. So thankful for all of the things, especially delicious food. That was a common theme. That
Right.
is love to a 7-year-old boy or girl.
It is. And I know in years to come, as they get older, I'm going to have to make more Wareneki as their
A lot
appetite,
more.
as their appetites get, increase.
Yep, you're going to have to start even more ahead of time.
I
Like
think
bigger and
so.
bigger freezer bags.
Right.
Well, from all your years of hospitality, do you have a story that you would want to share? Could be funny, could be a horror story.
I do. I came up with two of them. One is, it puts a smile on my face when I remember it. Early in our marriage, before we had any children, we invited a young couple over for dinner one day. And we were living in California at the time. That's where my husband and I met. And we lived for a year and a half down there before we moved to Montana. Anyhow, it was a last minute situation, and I didn't have time to plan anything in advance. So I thought, well, soup would be a good quick meal and a dish. And so that day was also the birth of what I would call refrigerator soup for years to come. Just ask my children, they'll tell you. So I had an assortment of delicious leftovers in the refrigerator. And by the way, my husband loves leftovers. I am so grateful. So all I needed was a soup base. So I prepared that, and then I dumped in all the leftovers out of my refrigerator and some seasonings, and I let it simmer until our guests arrived. So homemade whole wheat bread complemented the meal. So we had a great time of fellowship around the table. And then afterwards, I was asked for my soup recipe. I was embarrassed to tell my friend that it was made from leftovers. And I really honestly didn't have a recipe to share with her. Well, she insisted. With her newly discovered refrigerator soup recipe in hand, she and her husband thanked us for a lovely evening, and they were on their way.
It is embarrassing when you do something so easy, or if it's kind of a dump, you know, like you're saying from leftovers, like, oh dear, do I really have to tell you my secrets? That's pretty great.
Oh, but she was so insistent. I couldn't believe it.
And how in the world could you give her a recipe if it's leftovers? It's almost like you have to give her the recipe to what you'd made so that she has the leftovers to now add it to some other things.
Right. Yeah, it took quite some time for me to just remember what did I put in this. And I do have another story. It involves my oldest daughter who got me into this podcast.
Thank you, Rachel.
But it's a very sweet, very precious story. I wrote it down, so I'm just going to read it. My oldest daughter, Rachel, who I mentioned earlier, lives in Michigan. She's 45 years old, but at the age of 4, she accepted God's gift of salvation. And from that point on, she had a desire for others to know Jesus as well. In the next couple of years, there were a few times when we had company over for dinner that Rachel would get up from her chair very quietly during her meal, sneak over to my husband, who was sitting at the end of the table, the head of the table, and she would whisper to him, "Daddy, can you ask these people if they have Jesus in their hearts?" And he would comply. And then she went and sat down.
She had a heart for others, even at that young age.
Right. She did. And she still does.
Thank you so much for sharing your tips on hospitality and your thoughts on welcoming others into your home. It's just such a blessing to hear from people like you, to hear the wisdom that you've learned from years of creating that sort of home for others. And even though you mentioned unexpected guests or spur of the moment guests kind of make you a little bit flustered, it still sounds like it doesn't really matter. You welcome them anyway.
Thank you, Bess. It's been a joy to be on this program, and hopefully this has been a blessing to someone out there. And I know many, many people have been a blessing to me, and I've learned from other people. That's where I get a lot of helpful tips for my own life. So I'm very grateful.
Until next time, bye for now.